So welcome everyone. I'm glad you're able to join us today. My name is Emma and I'm a project officer at the Canadian Association of Midwives. This webinar is being presented by the Canadian Association of Midwives in partnership with the University of British Columbia. Today we'll be discussing about midwives and vaccinations, delivering informed choice discussions. Before starting, I would like to begin by acknowledging that the Canadian Association of Midwives office is located at unceded Indigenous lands. The Ganyan-Geaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Jean-Jage, Montreal, is historically known as gathering place for many First Nations. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. So before I present to you the speakers, I would also like to give you a little bit of housekeeping rules. So throughout the presentation, please feel free to post comments and questions in the chat. We have set some time aside at the end of the session for Q&As, and we'll do our best to get to your question. We do expect this to be a healthy, respectful, and constructive space. So hate speech, personal attacks, transphobia, racism, misogyny, and other forms of discrimination and the deliberate spreading of misinformation will not be tolerated. You'll be receiving an email tomorrow with a link to a survey. So please do take a minute and tell us what you liked about the webinar, and feel free also to leave us a comment. And don't forget to visit our website, canadianmidwives.org/webinars, for all our upcoming webinars and workshops, and also to watch the recording of this presentation. So, time to introduce our speakers today. So our first speaker is Kim Campbell. She's a registered midwife practicing in BC since 1998. Kim has been teaching in the UBC midwifery program since 2004, and has held different board positions and also represented midwives on the council of the SOGC for 2 terms. She's currently president of the Canadian Association for Midwifery Education and lead the Midwifery Continuing Professional Development Program within the UBC Faculty of Medicine Division of CPD. Our second speaker today is Jasmine Chatelain. She's a registered midwife who has primarily practiced in the Ottawa area. She's also participated in several participatory action research and clinical knowledge translation projects. The most recent of which was a joint CAM and NACAM project funded by the Public Health Agency of Canada. She's currently the director of the CRE board and of the Health and Social Services of James Bay Midwifery Education Program, in addition to working within this project. And last but not least, Wendy Pringle. She's a postdoctorate research fellow at the Vaccine Evaluation Center at the BC Children's Hospital Research Institute. She studies health and communication practices in the context of society and culture. As a postdoctoral fellow, she's currently focused on vaccine communication in healthcare settings. She works with Dr. Julie Bettinger at the Canadian Immunization Research Network to better understand how perinatal healthcare providers discuss vaccines with patients. And more broadly, her current projects focus on vaccine confidence and decision-making and path for improving pandemic response policy. So let me now give you the floor to Kim, who will present today's outline.
Thank you very much, Emma, and hello, everyone. I want to also acknowledge that I am on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Stolo Nation, in particular the Matsqui and Sumas peoples, connecting with you from Abbotsford. So to get started, we want to acknowledge that this project, this immunization partnership, has been funded by the Public Health Agency of Canada. And it's a project that's been awarded to the Canadian Association of Midwives and the National Aboriginal Council of Midwives. UBC Midwifery has come into play to help transfer the knowledge to you through an online program and a course specifically developed for midwives, and it will be translated into both languages. And there's the acknowledgement for PHAC for their funding, which is, they've been very generous. So I'm going to now, this is the outline for how the day is going to work. I have the slides and I have to push them forward. So our speakers will be asking me to push the slide forward, and there might be a slight delay. So we apologize for that, but it's easiest that way. As Jasmine's been introduced, and then Wendy will follow, and then I will be the end cap. So Jasmine, you have the floor.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Kim. I'd also like to acknowledge I'm sitting on unceded Algonquin territory here in Quebec. And I would like to encourage other people, as we learn to acknowledge Indigenous territory, to think about how you can do that not only in name, but also in action. Like Kim said, I was lucky enough to be the project officer for phase 1 of this program. So I'm just going to briefly overview what we did. And I will, but towards the end, just show you some visual examples of some of the materials that we produced. And there will be a link there for you to be able to go see them yourselves online. So basically what in 2018, PHAC, the Public Health Agency of Canada, did a survey of healthcare providers, including midwives, around their attitudes and experiences, their professional attitudes and experiences around immunization. And it emerged that both midwives and midwifery clients tend to vaccinate less than other healthcare providers and other healthcare provider clients. So this project was born out of curiosity around what that meant. And we started phase 1 in 2019 and finished it in 2020. So next slide, Kim. So the project objectives briefly were, first of all, just to gather information from midwives and clients with some specific information around Indigenous midwives and clients, both around practice, around immunization, and a little bit around attitudes, and then also what kind of materials midwives and clients would find helpful around immunization discussions. The second objective was to produce a position statement, a joint CAM and NACM position statement. And finally, as I've already said, to create some informational materials. Next slide. So very briefly, to gather information, we did a survey, we did some focus groups, and I did some key informant interviews. The survey was online in French and English for any midwife registered or Indigenous midwife and any client who had had midwifery care at some point. The focus groups were both online and in person in Toronto, Ottawa, Winnipeg, Vancouver. And the key informant interviews were I talked to about 10 people who work on an institutional level in midwifery education, research, some vaccine critical spokespeople. So I'm not going to get into detail here. You can see an overview of what we learned from this information gathering on our vaccine webpage on the CAM website, so you can get more information there. But suffice to say that we had overwhelming response to the survey. Almost 2,500 people responded within less than a week, which was very interesting. We did not have as much participation in the focus groups because COVID came, but even the ones that we did manage to run were very informative. So next slide. So basically, here are some key messages that we heard from our research. First of all, I think it's important to know that the majority of midwives who responded support vaccination. And Indigenous midwives feel that it is vitally important given that their communities tend to be higher risk, both in terms of health indicators and lack of access to public health measures. The midwifery knowledge, competencies, scope of practice, and practice management around immunization varies widely, from absolutely no pre-service training to and not in scope, not discussing it, to midwives who routinely discuss it, are trained, document when vaccines are given and actually vaccinate directly. So there's a huge variety of what midwives are doing around immunization. Next slide. And this is very interesting. So midwives feel that informed choice discussions are very important, that talking about immunization is a necessary part of client decision-making around immunization. Indigenous midwives and clients said that sometimes their informed choice discussions may be less complex around choice and rights, particularly to decline vaccination, just because they don't feel that their communities have as much practical choice around that, given their vulnerabilities. Indigenous midwives and clients also said that in informed choice discussions, the history that Indigenous people have with infectious diseases, vaccinations, and Canadian public health agencies, which has been very troubled and very scary for Indigenous people, is a really important component of ICDs. Next slide. So midwives said informed choice discussions around immunization are important, but they are challenging. Only up to a quarter of midwives feel confident talking about immunization. And these are very briefly some of the reasons that they cited: gaps in knowledge and lack of training, lack of access to primary data, lack of comprehensive midwifery vetted information, fear of client reaction or of undermining of midwife-client relationship, finding public health messaging to be problematic, trying to work within a social climate where they feel it is not acceptable to have questions and concerns around vaccines, fear of ostracization from colleagues, midwifery and other colleagues, general discomfort with the topic, and not feeling like it's appropriate to our role. Next slide. Clients told us that their experience around immunization services that women midwives offer also, of course, varies widely. So midwives that never brought it up, midwives that handed out a public health pamphlet, to midwives who provide very complex, comprehensive informed choice discussions and actually administer the vaccines themselves. Overwhelming, yes, I'd say 100% of all midwifery clients said they want to discuss immunization with their midwives. They would like to be vaccinated by their midwives if they are being vaccinated. And interestingly, this included childhood vaccines, because even though it's outside of midwifery scope, as we all know, the last midwife appointment tends to be a couple of weeks before the first vaccine for a newborn. And clients would really like to be able to at least discuss that with their midwives. They also overwhelmingly said that they trust their midwives to provide a thorough informed choice discussion in a respectful, non-coercive manner, even if they hadn't actually experienced it. Next slide. So what midwives, and I might have a slide wrong here, but clients echoed the same thing as midwives. When we asked them what kind of informational materials they wanted, the midwives said, we need education. We need to just know more around content. And we'd also like some help thinking about how we can talk about immunization within an informed choice framework. That was very, very important to midwives. Most midwives also asked for a midwifery created clinical practice guideline. They thought that would be very useful. Client handouts to give, and the emphasis was put on client handouts that isn't just a regurgitation of public health information, but really tries to provide comprehensive information both around vaccine benefits, but also unknowns, possible risks, adverse events, components or ingredients, and that it be produced with a very respectful, neutral tone. Both midwives and clients want resources, informational resources, and of course, Indigenous midwives and clients wanted materials that were specifically geared towards them. Next slide. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of what we came up with. This is a general poster that we produced. I should just preface this by saying that all of our materials that I'm going to quickly show you are available online, and many of them have also been produced. They've been printed and sent to midwifery practices and associations and colleges. So if you haven't got one and you'd like to get one, please contact CAM and they'll make sure that you get that. So this is our general poster and sort of the general thrust of our campaign, which is vaccines. We can talk about it. We wanted to signal to clients and midwives that it's acceptable to talk about immunization, including questions, concerns, not liking it, all that kind of stuff. Next slide. So here's just a screenshot of the web page. So if you go onto the CAM web page, and I will provide a link at the end, you'll see very quickly in the blue box here, it says vaccines homepage, which doesn't look like anything, but if you click on it, we have 22 sections of information there. It's really comprehensive. I believe that it's somewhat groundbreaking in the way that it's presented. We also provide many resources for clients and midwives. We do have a CAM member only webpage as well that just includes some high-level clinical studies and practice management information, like how to report an adverse event, for example. You'll see there our position statement. You'll see an overview of this project and our research summary. And you can get all of the handouts and all of that kind of stuff by either just looking at them, downloading them, or printing them. And your clients can do this directly as well if you're a midwife. Next slide. Very briefly, we created two what we call decision-making posters. Again, really just to sort of signal to people how they might start to think about immunization. And you'll see here, it's sort of three circles that say the science, me and my family, and my context. This is really just sort of ripping off evidence-based making components. And it highlights what the midwifery clients are wanting to talk about. Next slide. You'll see that poster can also be printed out as a handout, and what you just saw would be the front page, and on the back of the page we delve a little bit more closely into the science, my context, and me and my family. And really what we're trying to do with these handouts is offer clients some main crucial questions that they can ask around immunization, and some general sort of framework for thinking, for example, what are the benefits and risks of diseases and vaccinations. Next slide. Same thing, a decision-making poster, but geared towards Indigenous families. And you'll see that there's a fourth circle here called All My Relations, which is a quote from a Canadian Indigenous author that just really reflects sort of a pan-Indigenous worldview that everything, plants, animals, people, nature is connected, and that community is forefront. You know, in COVID, there's been a lot of emphasis around older people, and in Indigenous communities, elders are particularly precious, as sometimes they are the last knowledge keepers to hold language and teaching. So we really felt that it was important to acknowledge community as part of decision-making for Indigenous people. And you'll see at the bottom there, I know you can't read it, it says knowledge and trust, but it's just a very quick nod to the troubled history that Indigenous peoples have had with this topic, and that creates a sense of mistrust for people. Next. This is just the back of the handout, and it includes more space to jot down notes and practical information based on what Indigenous midwives and clients told us they would need in a handout. Next slide, please. This is just our position statement, just to let you know that it exists. I'm not going to get into it at all, but basically we're very proud that it is a balanced document that highlights that public health is important and that access to public health measures are important, as well as the importance of delivering immunization services within an informed choice context and supporting the general public to ask questions and insist on transparency around immunization. Next. Oh, we're already done. So these are the URLs to the web pages that I mentioned. You can go straight to the vaccine web page with the top URL to Canadian Midwives. And if your clients are going to NACM's web's homepage, you'll see a banner there that you can click on, and that'll bring you to the web page. So once again, it was really wonderful to work on this project. And as you'll find out soon, it generated a phase 2, which Kim is heading up, and that's also very exciting for us. So thanks, everyone.
So I'll jump in here. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you today. My name is Wendy Pringle, and it's my privilege to be speaking from the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory, also known as Vancouver. And just to give you a bit of an idea where I'm coming from, I'm a researcher at the Vaccine Evaluation Center, which is an academic center for independent vaccine research jointly supported by the BC Children's Hospital Research Institute and the University of British Columbia. And I've been working for the last couple of years with a team of communication researchers, an epidemiologist, a couple of midwives, and vaccine researchers on a project on vaccines and midwifery care. And I'm going to share some of our findings with you today. Next slide, please. Thanks, Kim. So for a bit of background, I'll let you know some of what we sort of already knew from previous research and from our team's past work. We knew that parents begin making decisions about whether to, about how to approach infant vaccinations during pregnancy, and that also that there's a correlation between vaccinating in pregnancy and then subsequently vaccinating in infancy. And we also knew from a survey, this was just with BC midwives led by our lead, Julie Bettinger, that BC midwives were likely to provide services to vaccine hesitant clients, but that most midwives were at least somewhat comfortable providing perinatal vaccines, so seasonal flu and Tdap, and were administering vaccines at least occasionally. So over 60% in BC were at that time. But we know that in other professions, it's commonly suggested to give a really strong recommendation to win parents over to vaccinating. But we had heard not all midwives feel comfortable with this kind of framing, even if they themselves are very pro-vaccine, very confident that it's the safest choice. And so much like Cam, whose project began quite around the same time as ours, we wanted to know how informed choice vaccine discussions were taking place, as well as what supports midwives nationwide may want. Next slide, please. So just a quick snapshot of our methods. We opted to use institutional ethnography for this, and that was due to its emphasis on treating lived experience as expertise. And so we did 17 individual interviews with practicing midwives in 6 Canadian provinces, so BC, Alberta, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, and Nova Scotia, as well as some folks involved in midwifery training programs, and then a couple of public health professionals with immunization training experience. And essentially what we heard was that some midwives were already very comfortable holding in-depth discussions about vaccines. Others wanted more support. And so these are some of the findings I hope will be valuable for the development of the next step. Oh, and just to mention, we also did a scan of all of the quite diverse, as Jasmine mentioned, regulatory documents from the profession, from the different provinces and territories. So we saw as well how much difference there is from region to region. Next slide, please. So just to share a snapshot of some of the range of experiences that we heard. On the left here, we have an example of one participant tell us how she relates the evidence behind the vaccine, the nationally recommended vaccines. So she explains how she goes into detail about the benefit of Tdap vaccine for whooping cough. I'll give you a moment to read that. And on the right, this midwife explained how she would usually share the basic detail of the federal recommendation, but she would typically defer the in-depth conversation to another provider. And of course, we heard a real range of experiences, much more diverse than I can relate in a short amount of time today. But generally, we heard that more supports, especially including detail about the potential risks of vaccinating, as Jasmine mentioned, were needed to really meet the standards of informed choice. And of course, these interviews were done before Jasmine and the CAM advisory committee had published the resources we're discussing today. Next slide, please. So we heard a great deal about the challenges midwives were facing, what they might need out of continuing education materials. And we heard that these really needed to present risks and benefits, detail the current scientific evidence behind the government recommendation in clear, accessible language. And sort of key for those we hope to reach who are not midwives is that what's important here is to assure the client that the choice is theirs to make. This isn't a revelation, of course, for most of you on the call today who already provide this care. But one of our hopes is to get the message about how these conversations typically take place out to the research world, to the public health world, and let them know that the issue is not always that midwives don't want to discuss vaccines with their clients, or that they are necessarily hesitant or critical themselves about the safety and efficacy, but really to underscore that the goal of informed choice is not to persuade, but to empower with information. And so we really wanted to spread the word about that, and just to explain how those conversations are taking place and all of the potential for building capacity on that front. So one great outcome, I think, of our results is that we can collaborate, and we're hoping that we can inform the development of the CPD course. So our team is helping to provide some content on how to understand vaccine hesitancy, what are some of the factors that contribute to it, some of the typical principles of effective immunization communication that can be taken up within an informed choice frame. And as well, just some of the detail about what we heard people wanted from a training course. So I will ask Emma to please queue up the poll question. What we have here are a couple of examples of things that we heard in our interviews about what questions midwives have. I think I spliced in some of the outcomes that are already planned for the CPD module, and we thought this would be a great opportunity to solicit a little bit more feedback on this front. So on that note, I will transition to Kim, who's going to take it from here. But please take a moment to let us know which among these things is the most important to you. Thank you again. Over to you, Kim.
Thanks very much, Wendy and Jasmine. And we'll give you a moment. Emma, you can tell me when most of the participants have voted. Take a moment to read your options and pick the one that is your priority.
Just wait a few seconds. we are at 40% of respondents.
I can't vote. I'm very disappointed.
I know, I want to too.
We are at 86% and just stopped. So
well, yeah, while we're waiting just another minute, I just wanted to add something to the conversation. I just recently became aware, well, this year we became aware that the CMRC has updated their competencies for midwives, that's the Canadian Midwifery Regulators Council. And I just got advanced copy of one of the competencies that's been revised. It was approved in December 2020, but it's not being launched until January 2022. But I'll read it to you. The existing one that we live with now is that there is only one mention of immunization in the competencies, and it states that immunizing newborns according to provincial and territory regulations and standards, that's across Canada. But the new approved competencies document says that, and these are all that intersect with vaccination and immunization, provides responsive counseling and education, and recommends appropriate resources. So that will be required across Canada for all midwives as a core competency. Physical needs to assess physical needs, including nutrition, exercise, stress reduction, management, sleep hygiene, drugs, tobacco, vaping, and alcohol awareness, immunizations, environmental, occupational, and pharmacological hazards, and food safety awareness. And there's more. So immunization has now been encapsulated in our core competencies to be able to have these informed choice discussions and support it. How'd the poll go? Do you have the results?
yes. So the majority, for the majority, the most, sorry?
Share the results with everybody. Can you share them with everybody?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. Interesting. We'll be able to help you with that. That's fantastic. So I'll move on to what UBC is creating through UBC CPD and the support of CAM and NACM. And the name of the course will be Advancing the Role of Midwives Providing Vaccination Information. So we have a course development advisory committee, and we were very fortunate to get these experts from across the country who can support our work. And I don't know if you know of any of these players, but these are very important people in our eyes that have significant contribution to supporting the work. And we have 2 consumers that were recruited from our consumer population, and they're very helpful as well. We also have a creative team and what I call content experts, and we have reached out to our nursing colleagues in the BC Centre for Disease Control. We have Wendy, who you've met today, and her colleague Julie Bettinger. They are from the Vaccine Education Centre at UBC. Jasmine and Diana Doe, who were working with CAM on the vaccination project, and myself as the just coordinator, I think, from UBC CPD Midwifery. We will be launching the course, and some of you may be very familiar with our platform, but UBC CPD sits within the Faculty of Medicine, and we have a midwifery base at UBC CPD where we're developing midwifery related content. This course will be free, of course, and available in both languages. And for those that aren't familiar with the platform, I encourage you to go to check it out. We have a lot of growing amount of data coursework up there. It's going to be a standalone educational model, and it will be interactive, and you can come and go as you wish, and there'll be opportunities to discuss with your colleagues through a discussion board, and we'll be able to update it on a regular basis as evidence comes forward regarding any aspect of what we need to talk about in immunization. These are the learning objectives of the course as identified by the project charter. We want at the end that people who take the course would be able to describe the roles and responsibilities of the midwife in public health immunization education and vaccination programs for pregnant and breastfeeding people and their newborns. We want to be able to help people communicate effectively about immunization as relevant to midwifery practice settings to address vaccine acceptance. We want be able to recognize and respond to the unique immunization needs of equity underserved populations during pregnancy and lactation, with special focus on Indigenous, BIPOC people and in COVID-19 outbreak populations. And finally, discuss the implications of basic ethical principles, including individual rights, confidentiality, privacy, informed choice, and informed refusal. I'm going to ask Wendy to set up this, what I'm about to show you, and I'm going to switch my screens. And this is a short video, so go ahead, Wendy. I'll just stop sharing and change over.
Sure, thanks, Kim. So this is a video clip developed on another project. It's targeted at a general perinatal care audience, but it's really meant to serve as a discussion prompt for what roles perinatal healthcare providers may play in recommending and providing vaccines. It's not meant to be like a standard of how to do things or a example of best practices, but really just a conversation starter for us today and for understanding how to broach the topic. So I think looks like you've got it queued up there, Kim.
Okay, I'm going to try it.
Uptake rates of prenatal, infant, and childhood vaccines are below the nationally recommended levels, which puts communities at risk. How are parents making decisions about vaccinations?
Good morning, Rachel.
If you're a healthcare provider, you know the importance of vaccines. But for someone having a baby, they're making decisions early. If your patients don't get vaccine information from you, they're getting their information from somewhere.
She's having a party in there today.
Yeah, I feel her all the time now.
How's your sister's wedding planning going? Did you find a bridesmaid dress?
Yeah. I'll be the only one at the stagette not drinking.
All for a good cause.
Yeah.
Any other questions today?
No.
Hey, Jade, did you get it? Did you open it? Did you read it? I just forwarded it to you.
New parents need information from professionals they trust.
It happened to my cousin's partner's his friend. It's complicated.
Not from Steve's partner's girlfriend's best friend. Study after study shows a confident recommendation from a trusted care provider is the #1 factor in vaccine acceptance.
It's good. You're doing really well.
I just want her to be born.
Anything else come up that you want to discuss?
But those conversations need to start early. When baby isn't even here, as a care provider, you're busy. And if you're not the one to give vaccines, you may not think to bring it up.
Hey, I think your baby's hungry. Might want to try feeding her, maybe.
New parents, like all of us, are sensitive to being judged. They might not voice all their vaccine concerns or initiate a conversation.
Weight's good. 80th percentile.
Public health called. They want her to come in for her shots next month.
Great.
I mean, I made the appointment, even though I've read some things.
Don't worry. The nurses there are great. They'll have all the information there for you.
What you think is deferring to another professional may be seen as a lack of endorsement.
Oh, 2-month vaccines? We're getting them too. Oh, he's over 1 year old, but we delayed everything. 2 months seems too young to get them. Their immune system gets overwhelmed, and that's why you see those kids with all the allergies.
We don't want the shots. I made a mistake.
I understand you're nervous. Let's just talk through your concerns.
What just happened? Let's try that again. Vaccine conversations need to start early, be unambiguous, and they need to happen with you, a care provider who already has a trusting relationship with the patient.
How's your sister's wedding planning going? Did you find a bridesmaid dress?
Yeah. I'll be the only one at the stagette not drinking.
All for a good cause.
Yeah.
Speaking of shots, let's talk about vaccines.
I mean, I know they're important. I just keep seeing all these things online.
Yes, I know it can be quite overwhelming. So here's a bit more reading for you. These are based on facts, not clickbait.
Okay,
Write all your questions down and we'll go over them at your next appointment.
that would be awesome.
The main thing is to start the conversation about pregnancy and infant vaccines early. Parents may want extra time to talk things through.
You vaccinated your kids, right?
Yes, of course. Looking at the evidence, the benefits clearly outweigh the risks.
A confident recommendation is important, and so is your own experience. With these tools, you can change outcomes.
I don't think I can watch.
You're doing great.
And that success can be reinforced across providers.
So coming up is our 12-month vaccination, and that involves the MMR vaccine. Now this is a critical one.
I know, I just had a few questions.
Sure. What would you like to know?
Uptake rates of prenatal, infant, and childhood vaccines are below the nationally recommended levels, which puts communities at risk. How are parents making decisions about vaccinations?
Good morning, Rachel.
You can help turn those numbers around. And it starts with a conversation.
Hey, how are you doing?
I think you should be sharing the final thank you slide now. You see that? Yeah. So we want to thank you very much for participating so far, and we hope there are some questions. I see that there's something in the chat. So Miigwech, merci, thank you. And thank you to everyone for coming. Let's have some questions.
Yes, so as I mentioned, the Q&A session is now open. So please do not hesitate to ask questions. And if possible, if you already know the person that one of the speakers that you want to ask the question to, you can mention the name of the speaker. So Wendy, Jasmine, or Kim. I see some hands raised. If you could write it in the chat, it will be easier. But if not, we'll just take one by one the people that have the hand raised.
While we're waiting for some questions, Jasmine, did you want to add anything while we're waiting for people to, or Wendy?
I didn't really have anything to add, but one thing people might be curious about is I mentioned in my little presentation that Indigenous people feel like their history around infectious diseases and immunization can make it harder to trust healthcare providers and trust around vaccines. So I could offer a little bit of detail around that because people might hear that and intuitively think, yeah, okay, that makes sense, but what exactly are you talking about? So very briefly, and there's a lot more than this, 90% of Indigenous peoples living here when European settlers arrived died from infectious diseases. So that's really terrible. And of course, like with everything else, Indigenous people are overrepresented in terms of which infectious diseases still run through communities and people who get very ill from them and people who die from them. So for example, tuberculosis is still rampant in our north, whereas it's not in our south. And then unfortunately, not only Indigenous people, but Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, but I'm going to talk about the Indigenous ones specifically, have experienced specifically harmful things around vaccination. So for example, many people were taken away from their communities to be sent to Indian hospitals, which were TB hospitals, where they did all sorts of nutrition experiments and vaccine experiments, and people died, and people never went home, and families back home never knew what had happened to them. There are also a lot of other accounts of vaccine experiments. And then of course, up until today, you know, something that you'll hear people repeat over and over again is that the two public health factors that have the most influenced our health are clean drinking water and vaccines. And we still don't have clean drinking water to all of Indigenous communities in Canada. So access to public health measures continues to be a problem. So I'm just like laying out some of that because as care providers, whoever in the group is a care provider, I think it's worth doing a little bit of your research and learning a little bit more about this because it does need to be acknowledged when you have conversations from the BIPOC communities.
So we have 8 hands raised. So I think it would be easier to let the people ask the question by voice. So Claudia, I'm going to allow you to talk. So the 8 people who have their hand raised, be prepared.
So first of all, the chat is disabled, so that's why you have no questions. And secondly, my question was, okay, we need to talk about it. The lady in the video says, oh, the benefits overweigh the risk, but we need more information to be able to believe that and say that and support that. Thank you.
Can I that one just quickly? So we know that we heard from midwives that they didn't feel adequately prepared to have that conversation. And that's a strong component of the online course where we're going to be targeting the immunizations that involve pregnancy and the newborn and the postpartum. So there'll be clear data there that people can dive into to stay informed about what the science says. The next question.
So Shannon.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. I'm just wondering if you could speak to the safety that's been done with the COVID vaccine for pregnant ladies. Any trials or safety?
We can't address that. I'm sorry. That's part of the content for the experts that are putting together for the course. And I don't think one of us here is an expert on that. So that'll be presented within the course. But thank you. That is a very important question we all want to know the answers to.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
And I'll just add, there are some great studies coming out now that enough time has passed internationally to be able to adjust it a little bit more. So that's great. We're getting more information now.
Thank you.
So next is Joanna.
Hi, thanks for enabling the chat box. I was just putting my question into that, but I think mine's a little bit repetitive of Claudia, the first one. Just that I was hoping that someone could point us to some sources so that we could feel more educated ourselves in order to provide better informed choice discussions on vaccinations for our clients. I don't know if someone can just, I understand that that's coming, but is there anything current that you can point us towards?
I'm going to quickly jump in here. If you go to the vaccine webpage on the Canadian Association of Midwives, there are two web pages that are called, I think it's called More Reading, but it's really resources. They're not perfect, but they're really comprehensive and they're geared towards clients and midwives. And they're well titled, so you can see what there is in there. So I would really encourage you to do that. I'm also just going to really briefly, because I'm seeing all of these things happen in the chat, and I know Kim will want to follow up on it, also to respond to Claudia earlier. You're absolutely right. Like, midwives want information for their informed choice discussions, but midwives also find it very difficult to get their hands on primary data, not just websites that say vaccines are safe. And having spoken to many people in public health and midwifery or immunization researchers and educators, you're right. If you're feeling that way, it's very difficult to sift through all the actual primary data there to be able to give a truly comprehensive look at vaccines. Having said that, I do think that our webpage at least makes a first stab at it, although most of the people that I've talked to have come to the conclusion that really in the end what we need is a clinical practice guideline. And that was just beyond the scope of our project.
And Jasmine, you probably include the Public Health Agency of Canada, which has some excellent resources in there for pregnancy and the newborn. And they also include detailed information through vaccine, with vaccine information for each of the products that you can go to now. And Immunize Canada also has resources. There were a few questions in the chat. I'm just wondering quickly if I can just say the name of the course again is the, I'm just going to go back and put it up there. Advancing the role of midwives in providing vaccination information. someone asked questions about the involvement of BIPAC people and in the research, and that Jasmine did some research and Wendy did some research. Were Black midwives or midwives or who work with high populations of Black clients involved in the initial study? Was that the initial study Jasmine did or the study that Wendy has done?
I'm sorry, I'm just looking to see what that was. Oh, we're Black midwives or midwives who work with Black in the initial study. I'm not clear if you mean the public health study that engendered this project or, yeah, I'm not sure. I know for us that we did have some Black midwives and Black clients who spoke with us about their experience around immunization. And in fact, one of our consumers for the online course is a Black woman newcomer to Canada. So, and I didn't say this, but if you take a look at the position statement, we directly address the BIPOC community, not just Indigenous people. I hope that answers some of your question.
Thanks, Jasmine. And I will add, you know, I so appreciate that you spoke to the colonial history of infectious diseases in the country. We did not specifically engage Black populations, but I will say from a vaccine best practices standpoint, it's critical to acknowledge past wrongdoings. So as Jasmine has done, you know, I think if you're not well informed about this past history, that can be, you know, a critical piece in terms of understanding where concerns may come from, and that goes for other communities of color as well. So I'm really thankful that we've raised that aspect of the issue.
So we have still some time for a couple of questions. One of the questions is, will the course generally cover the concept of vaccination or go into details about each vaccine? And how knowledgeable about each vaccine do we need to be to appropriate counsel people?
There was just a question I answered about the content of the course. The question was about understanding what the course will cover and what it will not. It's meant to be an easy digestible, under an hour opportunity for people to talk more about communication around vaccines. The details specific to the perinatal vaccines will be provided, and then links to other courses should people want to do a deeper dive. There are some excellent courses available through Canadian courses, specifically BC CDC has a course for immunization providers called the Pearls of Practice, which is open access, free to everyone. And we'll link those to you if you need to do a deeper dive into more broader concepts.
It's 10 hours.
We have another question. I would like to know, how did the studies about the safety of vaccination for babies starting at 2 months? Is it independent studies or is it the companies who created the vaccines?
Again, we're not vaccine experts. We're here to speak about the project, but the source of all the evidence will be cited. And Wendy, you may speak to that a little bit more if you have, because of your work, you may be able to answer that more clearly.
The question was about the source of the evidence. Yeah, I don't believe anything that we're going to include in the course is going to be, for example, produced by pharmaceutical companies. I think where we're citing evidence, it's going to be peer-reviewed studies in academic journals, medical reviews, but beyond that, yeah, I mean, the course is still in progress, so we don't have like the final list, but no, that evidence is going to be coming from vetted sources.
So we'll take a last question. That is, I'm wondering if this research has had any impact on the perception of midwives by other healthcare providers as not doing enough to convince the clients to vaccinate. I think this may have been something that Jasmine alluded to.
I'm sorry, you'll have to repeat that. I'm getting distracted by all the chats.
Yes, it's the last question of the chat. So the person is wondering if this research has had any impact on the perception of midwives by other healthcare providers as not doing enough to convince clients to vaccinate.
Right, okay. That was actually the one that I was reading. Yes and no. So we don't know if we have had an impact on how other healthcare providers perceive midwifery work around immunization. We are hoping that our position statement and our materials will open up that conversation a little bit more and allow other healthcare providers not only to possibly understand better midwifery intent to provide evidence-based information within an informed choice framework, but also possibly to understand better informed choice in general, and that how that may impact their own way of talking with clients or patients about immunization. One of the really great things about phase 1 and phase 2 of this project is there has been a lot of interprofessional collaboration and dialogue, and I have personally been pleasantly surprised at how interested and open-minded other healthcare providers have been to hear what midwives have to say around the opportunities and the challenges. And also I've heard other healthcare providers really talk about how they realize that because of the type of relationship that midwives and clients have, that midwives are in a very good position to talk about immunization with clients, given that they trust us and that clients are used to informed choice with us. And we have also taken upon ourselves to send our informational materials to lots of other allied healthcare providers, like people at the OSOGC and Canadian Pediatric Society, for example.
And I want to add that the Canadian Pediatric Society lead for their immunization vaccination position statement, Dr. Noni MacDonald, has been exceptionally supportive in advancing our cause and looking at ways to help midwives become engaged in an informed choice, more actively involved in some cases, involved in informed choice discussions with people.
So to finish, I would like just to add that all the materials of the phase 1 and also the educational model that will be produced for phase 2 will be also translated in French. And for the phase 1, everything is already translated in French on the CAM website. On the top right, you can put Français and you will see all the website and everything in French too. And so I would like to finish to thank our lovely speakers, Jasmine, Kim, and Wendy, our partner UBC, and of course, all of you, all of our attendees. Thank you for taking the time to join us today, and we also hope you enjoyed the session. The session will be recording and available on our website if you want to share it or re-listen to it. And also just a reminder that you'll be receiving an email tomorrow with a link to a survey. So please give us your feedback and remember to visit our website for more webinars and online events. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the day.